Welcome everybody, my name's Steve Hall. I'm your moderator for this morning. I'm delighted to see so many people here, and especially delighted to see that we've got over 300 people joining us online, so welcome to you too, wherever you are. The theme of the conversation today is around the future of sustainable seafood and the role of the MSC within that future. And that's a really important and quite critical topic, and I hope that we can do it justice in the time that we've got available to us. And given that time is tight, I'm going to skip through the logistics very rapidly. Bathrooms, as you know, are upstairs. Fire exit, come out through the exit that you came in through. If you hear a fire alarm, there is not a fire alarm scheduled, so if it happens, it's for real. The timing of the event will be as follows. We will have a short introductory overview from Rupert. We will then hear from Nicholas Guichou around some of the issues that the MSC is reflecting upon. That will be followed by a short presentation by Ali Dingwall, a keynote presentation to provide some of his perspectives on this topic. And then we'll have a panel discussion followed by a period of questions. I know that there are other events that are happening immediately after this one, and some people will need to leave early to prepare for those. So to give you a chance to ask questions, we'll try and make sure that we allow at least 10 or 15 minutes for that. And during the questions, Rupert and Nicholas will also join the panel. If there's a demand for questions following that, they're perfectly prepared to stay on beyond that to ask more technical questions or specific questions around the MSC for those who wish to for an hour or so. For those of you online, if you use the hashtag seafood futures, we will have the questions and we will try and introduce those as and when is appropriate. My job's to help you have a productive and valuable conversation and a stimulating and balanced discussion. And to that end, may I ask you all to keep your questions, your comments, and panelists, your responses succinct and to the point. And can we please avoid any kind of long and formal statements, because I think this isn't the forum for that kind of thing. Also, we are recording the whole thing and the presentations will be available online to you. So please, there's no need to record anything, please don't. We've got it all there for you as we move forward. Without further ado then, let me introduce the CEO of MSC, known to all of you I'm sure, Rupert Howe, to provide some opening comments. Rupert.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to the Seafood Futures Forum. I keep thinking there's a sustainable in there, but maybe that's what we're going to debate. Given all of the competing demands on your time at this busy show, I really do appreciate you all getting here before the show opens to join us. And as Stephen has just said, there's over 300 people registered to join us online. Registration, we've looked at the mix of people joining us. We've got harvesters, processors, retailers, food service, NGOs, and media. And I think that very much reflects the MSC multi-stakeholder model that we're very committed to. I'd like to take this opportunity as well. I can't actually see anything, but Werner Kiener, MSC's Chair of Trustees, is in the audience somewhere. I don't know, Werner, if you can stand up. At least I hope you're in the audience. There we are, at the back. MSC invests a huge amount in governance. I think it underpins the trust and credibility of the program. We have an international board of trustees, 15 individuals, and hardwired into the DNA are 2 seats for the industry, 2 seats for the market, 2 seats for scientists, and 2 seats for NGOs. Again, reflecting that balance and that multi-stakeholder model. We have a technical advisory board made up of leading experts in fisheries science and supply chain integrity and traceability. And we also have a stakeholder council. A stakeholder advisory council has recently been sort of recalibrated. We had our inaugural meeting just last week. And again, the membership of that group reflects our multi-stakeholder model with the balance between industry and NGOs. And in fact, we have several members of our stakeholder council in the room. I don't know if you want to stand up and show where you are. Don't be shy. And we also have members from our technical advisory board as well. So I mention all of that, as well as MSC staff from across Europe and America as well, and Asia. And so please do join us afterwards if there are any more questions you want to go through with MSC. So it definitely feels like a moment in time for the oceans. The United Nations hosted the inaugural Oceans Conference for the UN, the headquarters in New York last summer in June 17. In October, the EU hosted the latest Our Oceans Conference in Malta. And just in March of this year, The Economist hosted their 5th World Oceans Summit. I mean, without doubt, oceans are on the map. They're on the political map. And I also think, fueled by outstanding programs like Blue Planet 2, more media interest, that oceans are becoming a much more public issue. People care deeply, and a particular resonance around the issue of plastics. So, are our oceans in trouble? I think they are. You look at the impacts of acidification and climate change, devastating coral reefs, and some of the facts and figures that are being talked about are really troubling. I'm not a reefs expert, but I understand that business as usual, if we cannot keep warming below 2 degrees, will mean something like 70 or 80% of warm water reefs will be gone, and there's very little we can do about that. Climate change impacts are already impacting on MSC certified fisheries. Fish migration patterns are changing, reproductive health is being impacted, and a number of MSC fisheries have lost their certificate as fish have changed their migration patterns. We're also told that by 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish. Now, I have no idea how accurate those figures are, but when you think we produce 280 million tons of plastic every year, much of it for single use, and estimates of 8 to 12 million tons hitting the oceans every year, it's hard to see how we would get up to that statistic. And in relation to fisheries, a third of global fish stocks, assessed stocks, are now classified as overfished. Now that's a threefold increase since the 1970s. So I think it's fair to say, at the very least, our oceans are under a huge stress and pressure. And particularly at a time that we're moving from 7 billion people on this planet to 10 billion people, and a desperate need to get more sustainable low-carbon protein. So actually, one other fact that I found quite amazing. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change has estimated that by 2020, it's going to cost $100 billion every year, each and every year, to mitigate the effects of a degraded ocean. So I think now really is the time for action. And despite the trends and the scale of the challenges, I'm actually an optimist. I think many of you who know me know that I'm an optimist, and you have to be an optimist to run the MSC because it can be challenging on occasion. But my optimism stems from the fact that we now have the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals to end poverty, protect the planet, and to ensure prosperity for all. A route map to try and move us from, in many senses, an unsustainable system of production and a rather inequitable one to a more sustainable and more equitable system of production and consumption. I think what's so enormous about the SDGs is that this plan for planet Earth has been signed by 193 nations. And we have a dedicated oceans target, SDG 14, Life Below the Ocean, with 10 separate goals that seek to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources. And I think that resonates particularly for MSC, because MSC is primarily about sustainable resource use within ecological limits. We care passionately about ocean health and resilience and biodiversity. We care passionately about the livelihoods and the ability to generate sustainable seafood supplies into the future. So there's never been a better time, given all of this attention, given this route map, to galvanize action to improve the health of our oceans. And I think it's really appropriate today that we're going to be reflecting on what this means for the MSC. We're 20 years old, but what does it mean? What's our place through your continued engagement and leadership to contribute to the delivery of the SDG targets? So I'm very much looking forward to our keynote speaker, Ali Dingwall, and to the panel discussion, and to hearing your views in the question and answer session. One last comment. Clearly, there's an absolute urgency to all of this. 4 of the SDG 14 goals are due to be delivered by 2020, barely 2 years away. Those include ending overfishing, eradicating IUU, banning harmful subsidies, and effectively regulating harvesting. I think the SDG framework is singly ambitious, and it's also very, very obvious that there's no silver bullet to these challenges. It's going to need partnership and collaboration. It's going to need public policy reform. It's going to need advocacy, awareness raising, and I also believe credible market-based programs to help to get those signals right and incentivize the right sort of behavior to take us in that direction. So I will leave my opening remarks there. Before we move to Ali Dingwall's presentation, we have Nicolas Guichou, MSC's Global Commercial Director, who will give you an update on progress this last year, key trends, and where we're heading to. So over to Nicolas. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Our team for the Seafood Forum, Futures Forum is Fit for the Future, how the MSC can stay the course. Rupert just made a reference to the UN SDGs, especially on Goal 14, which is about the conservation and sustainable use of our oceans. Today we are going to try and explore how the MSC program fits into a global effort to use our oceans more sustainably. So, in terms of where we currently fit in, the UN Biodiversity Indicators Partnership, BIP, is a global program that allows governments to measure progress towards biodiversity targets. They have identified the MSC as a tool to deliver and measure a number of these targets, including SDG 14. The MSC was also recognized by GSSI last year for meeting all essential components of its benchmarking against the FAO international guidelines for certification and eco-labeling programs. We are unique in also meeting the supplementary components on issues such as vulnerable marine ecosystem, inclusive stakeholder engagement, and providing public evidence behind scoring decisions. In addition, the MSC is also one of the few standard setters globally, not just for seafood, that meet the 3 codes of good practices of ISIL for standard setting, assurance, and impact of its program. So one could argue that this is more than enough to demonstrate the role and credibility of our program. However, the MSC is still challenged by some NGOs to keep raising its sustainability bar. On the other hand, many certified fisheries complain they can't keep up with the pace of changes in the MSC program. Our ambition is to strike a delicate and pragmatic balance to engage fisheries in order to drive improvements. So, indeed, today 14% of global wild capture is MSC certified or in assessment, implying that 86% is not. So this graph shows that while we continue to make progress and drive improvement, there is still a very long way to go before all fisheries are able to engage in the program. This limits the change that the MSC standards helps to deliver. We've demonstrated that our theory of change works. MSC has been a catalyst for more than 1,000 improvements in fisheries worldwide, as reported in our global impacts report that invite you to consult on our website. But most fisheries improvement projects, such as SFP, O2, and WF, I know many are in the room, use our standard as a framework for improving fisheries which are not ready to meet the MSC bar. But what this graph doesn't show is that many of the certified landings come from countries that are already considered the best in the world when it comes to management. Denmark, Norway, New Zealand, Canada, USA, all have more than 50% of their landings certified. And this year, Iceland announced that 90% of their landings are now certified. The Icelandic announcement followed the certification of several new fisheries, such as mackerel, tusk, wholefish, blueling, and 2 world firsts for new species, capelin and monkfish. Other firsts around the globe were Greenland halibut and abalone in Western Australia. Western Australian rock lobster also became the first fishery to be recertified successfully for the 4th time. But I'd like to focus today on 2 fisheries which demonstrate how the MSC program performs at its best. The first is the North Sea brine shrimp, a very old fishery that used to trawl on horseback, but now comprises 400 boats that catch 30,000 tons of shrimp annually. In a pre-assessment more than 10 years ago, serious questions were asked about the fishery and its management, and it was shown not to meet MSC requirement at the time. A new collaboration to achieve MSC certification started in 2015. Before this, there was no quotas or restrictions on fishing efforts. The University of Hamburg and a working group helped to develop harvest control rules to ensure the healthy growth of the stock. During the assessment, a coalition of 8 conservation NGOs also contributed constructively to the outcome. The fishery will have to fulfill several conditions in the coming years to keep the MSC certificate, and several NGOs and the fishery will facilitate together the project. So when so often the attention focuses on the few fishery stakeholders cannot agree on, this is a great example indeed of a constructive multi-stakeholder collaboration to support a fishery. This is what Healthy Oceans means and demonstrates how the MSC standard can provide a common framework. The second example is less nice in a way, because unfortunately, sometimes things don't go well. This year, the MSC certificate for the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence snow crab trap fishery in Canada was suspended. Due in part to the mortality of 12 right whales in Canadian water, the fishery was found to no longer meet the MSC standard related to endangered, threatened, and protected species. Suspension is always difficult to take, but in this case, again, we have witnessed a very proactive response from the fishery. Our standard is really designed to allow us to stay engaged with fisheries, because it is only by being at the table that the MSC program can work with fisheries to influence and drive improvements. And as you can see on the screen, we are very pleased that the fisheries remains committed to the MSC program and wish them every success in implementing a corrective action plan. But we're also working with fisheries that are not yet sustainable. MSC is often seen as a standard setter and eco-labeling program only, but we do a lot behind the scenes to support broader sustainable development. This is what we term the pathways to sustainability. We have helped to build capacity in fisheries and work with FIP providers and management authorities across the world. This includes working to develop multi-fisheries pre-assessment projects in 14 countries, you can see here, often aimed at supporting small-scale inshore fisheries to build action plans. The most recent one is actually a collaboration in India between the Indian Central Marine Fisheries Research, WF India, and a number of Indian seafood processors. 10 fisheries, including blue swimming crab, shrimp, and cuttlefish, have been identified for targeting MSC certification. This is a very exciting project in a very important country for seafood. But we also found external projects that we're not involved in. The MSC, through the Global Fisheries Sustainability Fund, awarded more than £200,000 in 2017 to 5 projects that will aid small-scale and developing world fisheries in improving their sustainability. Examples you can see also on the previous slide. This slide shows actually is something we provided last year to 2 students with scholarships to help fund the research on the trade flows of octopus from small-scale fisheries in East Africa and the use of LED lights on nets to reduce turtle bycatch in Kenyan artisanal fisheries. And now to the markets. As you know, our program relies on market demand for eco-label products, which provide incentives for fisheries to become and remain sustainable. So I would like to update you on some of the progress observed over the past year. We are about to reach 29,000 MSC label products sold in 108 countries. In 2017, this represented 20% growth in volume globally, which is one of the strongest in recent years. In terms of volume per country and the distribution of MSC label products, Germany is still by far the leading market globally, followed by the UK, US, France, and Sweden. The fastest growth, 6 times, occurred in China, followed by Italy, where we have very strong growth as well, Japan, Portugal, and Poland. All countries where sustainability has become increasingly important for seafood professionals, where we still have to do make a lot of effort with consumers. I mentioned last year that we have less growth in demand from the wet fish counter and food service sectors, which is why this is a new strategic focus for us. But we have seen recent progress. Eroski and Tesco came on board last year. This year it is COP Sweden that got all fresh fish counters certified. Carrefour will have them by the end of this year, which is quite a big deal in France, where more than half of the fish is consumed fresh. Carrefour focused their efforts on the top species, wild caught and farm salmon. Both are already 100% MSC and ASC. As one of our fastest growing markets, in Japan there is a real drive for sustainability, mainly triggered by the seafood sourcing policy of Tokyo Olympics 2020 and the great work of retailers Aeon and Japan Coop. It is interesting to notice that Mayura, Nichiro, Nisui, and Kyokuto all introduced MSC label product for the first time last year. This is a significant move, as we have witnessed in other markets that when brand leaders come on board, it becomes a catalyst for the rest of the market to follow. It's also significant more globally because Mayura, Nichiro, Nisui, and Kyokuto are amongst the top 10 largest seafood companies in the world. In food service, Finnish cruise line Tallink Silja became the first in the world to serve MSC certified seafood, and in China and Japan, the first independent restaurants were satisfied. And this year, as you can see here on the slide, we've seen several new developments in food public procurement policies across Europe. MSC is often the only reference, actually, for wild seafood. In October this year, the European Union hosted our Oceans Conference, October last year, our Oceans Conference, where the MSC launched a new partnership initiative called the 2020 Leaders for a Living Ocean. We gathered commitments from 27 companies dedicated to making real progress towards the SDGs by increasing availability of certified sustainable seafood. Please note that new companies can still join this initiative. At the meeting, the MSC also announced its ambition to 20% of global wild capture to be engaged in the program by 2020. And to achieve this, we will deliver new tools to better enable fisheries in the global south to progress towards the MSC bar. We will also focus on large marine ecosystem underrepresented in the MSC program, where the threat to biodiversity is high. Among these 27 companies, we have Sainsbury, Carrefour, Aeon, Coles, Kroger, IKEA. Sorry, I won't name all of them. We also know that consumers play a key role in the program. To raise awareness on sustainable seafood choice and educate the public on sustainable fishing, our offices around the world have organized over 20 sustainable seafood campaigns over the past 12 months, often jointly with ASC, WF, or other NGOs. One of the most successful one took place in France for a week, where MSC collaborated with many commercial partners, but also institutional partners such as France Nature Environnement, the Musée Océanographique de Monaco, or the Paris Aquarium. Sorry, I won't name all of them. The impact was pretty impressive, with our partners reaching almost 4 million online followers and 40 million consumers through retailers' catalogs. The team ran public debates and launched a French translation of a new global educational film for schools, which just last week won a prestigious award in the UK. For the next topic, in our pre-conference survey, you voted the next session the most wanted. Every 2 years, the MSC commissions one of the largest seafood consumer surveys in the world, covering over 25,000 consumers across 22 markets. Today, we have hot from the press the first results. Really hot from the press is from last week. The results is that ocean pollution is high on the public agenda, ranking as the top ocean concerns for consumers today. However, overfishing is a close second in almost all countries. In the last survey, consumers ranked sustainability as second only to taste and quality as a motivator when purchasing seafood. This year, in all but 7 markets, price now ranks above sustainability, indicating a more challenging environment than 2 years ago and reinforcing the need to emphasize personal benefits. We are encouraged that consumers' awareness of the blue MSC label has increased globally from 38 to 41% across the 22 markets, and consumer trust remains high at 67% globally. All of that is our average, obviously. Full results will be shared over the next few months. Please click on the link at the bottom of our emails to ensure you are invited to webinars that we will organize in the next few months. Finally, I would like to update you on 2 key projects aimed at improving the integrity of the MSC program. The first one is about improving traceability by putting information about product origin on a digital platform and reducing the times it takes to do tracebacks. We term these key data elements. Over 2018, we will work with ASC to run a proof of concept with 6 supply chains. This will include large and small companies across the globe and ones that are already using digital traceability systems, but also those that don't, because we've seen that in over 4,000 chain of custody holders around the world, we have a lot of difference in terms of traceability system in place in those companies. If successful, a wider pilot will be a rollout that is open for all MSC and ASC partners to join. The second workstream is focused on social considerations. Over the past few years, our stakeholders have highlighted the increasing importance of social issues in the seafood sector. It is today outside of MSC's core mission and a complex issue. But through collaboration with other standard setters and through mechanisms that foster transparency, MSC can help efforts to understand and address this. So we are proposing to introduce an eligibility requirement for fisheries to disclose measures, policies, and practices they have in place to ensure the absence of forced labor. For the supply chain, we are proposing to introduce a requirement for high-risk land-based supply chains to undertake a third-party audit with social standard. We are actively consulting now, but we expect to release the first of the new requirements this August. So, as you can see, another very busy year full of exciting new developments for the MSC. Our program is now truly global with strong growth in new countries, new market segments, new commodities, and new projects. But our program is also challenged by some stakeholders from industry and NGOs, with often very conflicting views on what MSC should do. As you can imagine, it can be difficult for us to navigate through such opposite demands, but that is the unique role that we strive to fulfill. And we recognize it can be even harder for the users of our program. Therefore, I'm very pleased to introduce one of these users, your keynote speakers, Ali Dingwall from Sainsbury's. Sainsbury's is one of the trailblazers of sustainable sourcing in the UK and certification in the retail sector. They have worked with the MSC program for more than 15 years now. Ali was actually one of the retail industry's first dedicated aquaculture and fisheries manager, and is very knowledgeable about the challenges and opportunities that sustainability brings to businesses such as Sainsbury's. So we are lucky that we share his vast experience with us today. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you, Nicola. Morning, everyone. Wow, there's a lot of you, isn't there? It's a bit disconcerting. Firstly, I'd like to thank the MSC for the opportunity to talk to you all today and engage in the dialogue with the panelists. I think it should be a productive dialogue, and it's great to see so many big hitters in the audience, while slightly disconcerting. Nicola and Rupert have given you the kind of big picture overview of why this issue is important and some of the things that we need to tackle and that are being tackled. But I'd like to give you a more kind of local business perspective about what we've done and why we've done it and how it links into that big picture. First, a little about Sainsbury's. You have to have this. It's obligatory. That's the Sainsbury's Group at a glance. We're not just a grocery retailer. We've got quite a diverse portfolio, but obviously I represent the fish and seafood element of our supermarket chain, where we have over 1,400 stores only in the UK. We're a UK business with 180,000 colleagues, 27 million customer transactions per week, and a 16% market share in the grocery market. And that makes us the second largest retailer in the UK. Our company values. So our business is underpinned by 5 core business values, and they shape our everyday business activity. And those business values are embedded in our sustainability plan, which has a number of targets linking to each business value and a steering group and a management group, which ensures that we are on track and delivering against those targets. So we have targets and metrics in place to measure our performance and report on our performance. Our sustainability plan was launched in 2011 under the 20 by 20 banner, where we had the same 5 values with 20 commitments and 100 delivery goals. We then revised, refreshed, reviewed that plan in 2015 and rebranded it. And we do that periodically just to make sure that our thought processes are in line and our targets are in line with current thinking and thought leadership. And that retained the business values. They are fundamentally sound. But then we aligned ourselves with the Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, because we recognise as a business that we need to play our part, and we all as individuals need to play our part in delivering the big picture. And we're now at that point in time where we are reviewing, as normal business process, where we go after 2020 as part of normal business process. So what does this mean for fish? So back in 2020, our sourcing with integrity value included fish, and we made the decision that by 2020, all the fish we sell will be independently certified as sustainable. And in 2015, 2016, obviously we aligned that with SDG 14, in particular 14.4, the End Overfishing IUU Destruction Fishes Practices. So we're aligned in every respect, recognising that they are ambitious targets. So why did we adopt the MSC? It's a question that's often asked. Well, we believe we looked at the standards that were available, and the MSC had credibility, a governance framework, a robust government framework was independent, but in particular, it did measure impacts, it could demonstrate improvement, and it had global applicability. Fisheries sustainability in seafood is complex, and consumers understand that there are issues with this, but they don't take a deep dive, or many consumers don't take a deep dive into the issues. So we needed a vehicle where we could demonstrate responsibility and sustainability to consumers across the whole portfolio of fish and wild-caught fish and seafood that we sell, and the MSC delivered that simple, credible, and robust message for us. And it delivered a platform for improvement, because at the very start of this, when you make a commitment, you have to understand what you're selling and what the pathway is to delivery. You can't just make a commitment and say, yeah, we'll worry about how we deliver that later. So through the fishery improvement process, the MSC delivered that platform for improvement, which was important to us. The MSC also delivers the ability for us to connect our local agenda under our sustainability plan to the global vision through, as I say, credible FIPs. The MSC standard is the basis for the work plan for a credible FIP, and through certification to link globally to the SDG target. Credibility of the MSC has been underpinned by the GSSI benchmarking framework, which further added to the credibility and the robustness of the scheme, and we see that as a really positive development. So no presentation would be complete without a little update on how we're doing. So you see on the right here the chart linking to our progress post 2011 when we made the initial commitment. We'd obviously been selling MSC certified seafood before that, but we were on a steady pathway to delivering our target. Currently 86% of our wild-caught seafood by value is certified to the MSC standard and carries the eco-label and chain of custody. And that's over £240 million worth of sales, and we have plans in place to deliver for the rest of our supply base. Why do we do this? This is quite intuitive, actually. We're not a legal minimum business. We market ourselves as a responsible business, and that responsibility is a fundamental expectation of our customers. Our customers see this as important, obviously, and expect us to do the right thing. And in fact, when it comes to fish and seafood, they expect everything that we sell to be sustainable. And there's sometimes a surprise when we, by our own definition, say, everything isn't sustainable. There are things to do here. Everything isn't perfect. There's work to do, but we are on that path. So we need to meet our customer needs and expectations. Obviously, we have other stakeholders' needs that we need to meet from a reputation, recognition, and regulation perspective, and that includes engagement with the NGO sector in respect to their needs. But there is a fundamental economic case for sustainability and doing the work that we do, and that's in securing supply of raw materials for the future. So if we invest in the sustainability agenda and work with our supply base, then we're going to have fish to sell today, tomorrow, next year, 10 years' time. So a sound economic rationale, but it is a balance, and it's going to be a key theme of today's discussion, I think. We're constantly, unconsciously balancing the needs of all these stakeholders as we move through time whilst constantly improving our performance. And it's the same way in terms of delivering the triple bottom line of sustainability, with social, environmental, and economic. There is a balance to be had between all of those elements of sustainability, and it changes. It's a highly dynamic environment, but we've got to focus on the key outcome at the end of the day, where we deliver against all of these things. And we do this in the context of a highly diverse supply chain and a global supply chain with diverse stakeholder needs within each of those countries and oceans. And again, we need to balance that with the backdrop that our objective is to deliver affordable quality food for our customers. And we need to employ that balance and deliver that balance in order to deliver that, or else. If we take a very, very high view on sustainability, then we probably certainly in the very early days, would have excluded 90% of our supply chain. The key thing is here that we need to work together in realistic timescales to deliver the desired outcome. And that sometimes takes compromise and certainly takes balance. So how have we done this? Well, how most businesses done this. It requires a fundamental business commitment to engagement, to organizational engagement and dialogue. This costs a lot to have this dialogue. It just doesn't happen. If we were to give an instruction to our supply base, say, go and do this, in all chances it wouldn't happen. We need to invest in that dialogue. And we need to be willing to have that dialogue with our competitors on a pre-competitive basis. And that was something that was quite new 10 years ago. It's far more common now, but we recognized that we couldn't do this on our own. There's a lot of heavy lifting to do here, so we need to engage with our competitors on and other retailers and stakeholders on a global basis to drive improvement at a global scale, and sometimes at a local scale. And I have to give massive credit to our supply base here, that our supply base obviously thinks like us, and primary suppliers in particular, who've done a huge amount of the heavy lifting in this. And also to Sustainable Fisheries Partnership, who in the early days we partnered with to ensure that we were on the right track, that our thought processes were consistent with the NGO community and workable and achievable. And we also have engaged in many, many different organizations which have delivered global outreach and again done some of the heavy lifting, as have our supply base. Innovation has been absolutely key, and we need to engage far more in the innovation agenda and embrace the innovation and adapt to change to ensure that we deliver the improvements in a cost-effective way. Standards for us have obviously played an important part in this, in delivering assurance on a global basis. But we need to make sure that those standards are credible and robust and have a robust framework that meet the needs of all stakeholders. And that can sometimes be controversial because sometimes things get out of balance. So this is about the future. Where do we go from here, from a business perspective and from an MSC perspective? I think that the takeaway for me is I don't believe that the model we have is broken. I think fundamentally the model is sound. I think what we need to do is we need to build on what we have. We need to make sure the framework is ever more robust, that if fisheries are certified, that they should be certified, whether that's through building peer review capacity and ensuring that certification bodies are consistent and robust, and that we maintain that robust framework for all stakeholders. But there has to be balance. We can't deliver the needs of all stakeholders right now all the time. We need to engage more in collaborative dialogue. We need to ensure that we adapt new technologies and take account of new evidence and new scientific evidence in the assessment, in the certification, and in the improvement process. And at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we do this in a cost-effective manner, because we need to be cost-effective. We need to sell affordable food, and things need to be achievable for our supply chain at the end of the day. And if we do this, at the end of the day, as I say, I think the framework is in place. We will deliver against the vision, and we need to stay connected with the vision and not lose sight of that. I think sometimes we can lose sight of that and it all becomes a bit competitive. But if we do work together collaboratively, build on the framework, we can deliver both the MSC vision, they can deliver against their vision, and deliver against SDG 14. And that would be a great place to be. Thank you.
Ali Dingwall, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Ali, you don't get to go, you get to go and sit down there. And could I ask our other panel members to join us, please? Ali has been adequate and very well introduced earlier. Let me introduce the other members of the panel. We have in running order as they walk across the stage, indeed. We have Amanda Nixon, who's the Director of International Fisheries for the Pew Charitable Trusts, Anneli Selander, who's the Group Sustainability Director for Nomad Foods, and Ture Borkland Larsen, the Sustainability Advisor for Norwegian Fisheries. Please go steady on the vodka, because you will be grilled carefully in the next little while. Let me ask you all about that bigger picture. For you, if you think about what's happened in the last 4 or 5 years, what's changed, either socially, technologically, politically, or in terms indeed of what we know, what we've learned, and how have those changes altered the landscape and the expectations for the Marine Stewardship Council? Who'd like to start? It's only a small question. Ali.
I mean, there's a fundamental in this for me, and strangely enough, I was asked this question last week in another forum, what's changed? And I think it is willingness to collaborate. It's on a pre-competitive basis. 10 years ago, you wouldn't have seen retailers sitting in the room together talking about pre-competitive issues and recognising the need to move the dial on this and recognising that we can only do this by working together. I think more recently there's been more willingness and a more adaptive approach by some members of the NGO sector who historically might have taken a very, very hard view on issues, or recognising that that probably isn't the way to drive improvement, and that by maybe taking a softer view and engaging in the dialogue, maybe achieving outcomes in a slightly longer timescale than they might need is actually the way to deliver change.
Sure, I can pick up on that. Well, if we go even further back than 5 years, I think over the last decade, things have changed fundamentally in the industry with the collaboration and cooperation across the industry with NGOs and with companies. And I think that the MSC has been an amazing catalyst for the way that sustainability has become embedded into the individual companies' strategies. And when we walk around the Brussels Expo here, we can say that certainly a lot of it may be window painting. We see the MSC signs everywhere. But I think that the way of thinking has evolved incredibly, and I think that the way that the MSC has facilitated this has been beyond any expectations, and I think that the real results of it will be seen in the when we look 10 years back. I think we will really realize how profound this change has been.
Interesting. Emily?
Yes, if I build on that, and if I take more of a consumer perspective, and it was mentioned before, but what we see is that consumers have for a while said that they are willing to change, but we haven't really seen the change. But what we're seeing now is that sustainability becomes this driver of preference, so consumers actually acting the way they've said, and I think that is a big, big change. But I also think there's an issue with it, and it is that they start asking for transparency. So we're going to have to be willing to open up, and we're going to have to become more transparent.
Amanda, from the other side of the fence, so to speak.
Well, I would hope at this point that speaking on behalf of an NGO doesn't put us on the other side of the fence, given the importance of collaboration as it's been outlined. I would say, I'll go back even further and say, since the inception of the MSC, there has been a large-scale change across global fisheries governance. And it's moved in the direction that one would like to see it move in terms of increased and more accountable governance, but it also means that the role of the MSC changes. So before, where it was the benchmark, now you see a lot of fisheries governance and management processes, in large part catalyzed, I believe, by the MSC, moving towards that same level of management or aspiring to that. And it means that the whole notion of sustainability is not a static concept. So it raises the question now of where does MSC fit into that broader playing field. But I think that we have to acknowledge that there are a whole series of very positive changes in that broad landscape that have been catalyzed either directly or indirectly by the MSC.
And you've alluded to something there which I think kind of is bubbling around both from Nicholas's presentation and elsewhere, around this issue of balance and the shifting landscape of sustainability. And it seems that one of the key questions that is being asked is, what's the optimal pace of change in the standard? The goal, setting any goal, any management book will tell you it has to be challenging but achievable. And if it's not challenging, then there's no point. If it's not felt to be achievable, then it's very demotivating. How do we navigate and find that right balance between an advancing standard and avoiding demotivation?
Well, as I think Nicholas mentioned in his keynote, I come from one of the most privileged nations in the world in terms of achieving MSC certification, where Norway is generally regarded as one of the top performers in fisheries management. So we've picked all the lowest hanging fruits, and that has taken us up to more than 90% of our volumes MSC certified. But one thing that has changed a lot over the last 5 years is the MSC standard itself. It has raised the bar, and we still haven't caught up to that bar because of the lag and the time difference in implementing new standards. And I'm quite aware that as a client, as a user of the standard, we have some real pains to go through over the upcoming years in fulfilling conditions to meet the standard that we are subject to now. And so I would say that stability should be the main goal of the MSC standard at this point, because even I, as a client from the most privileged fishery nation in the world, even I feel that there are some pains in this process. Now, if I were a developing nation aspiring MSC fishery, I would probably be a lot more frustrated. It could feel like now the rich people have gotten in the program and they're pulling up the ladder behind them.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting perspective. Amanda?
I think for me it raises the question of what is the change that we're seeking and what is the role of the bar. So if the idea is to bring more fisheries globally into the program in a way that enables continuous improvement, that is one critical and an important area of work. The other part of it is, how do you maintain a standard that actually pulls improvement behind it, regardless of whether or not X number of fisheries actually reach certification? And to me, that is the existing tension, is what is the change that is being sought. Rupert talked about the need for a range of program opportunities for participation for a range of fisheries at different levels and in different styles of governance. And on the other hand, a certification implies the ability to control quality and demonstrate governance at a certain level. Mm-hmm. And so I think the question I would have is, how do you cater to both of those sets of needs while not allowing the quality of the certification to in any way diminish? And the reality is that with new information and changing oceans, we have to find a way to update the standard and not allow that diminishment to occur.
Ali?
I absolutely agree. I think it does depend on the issue as well. And we have to bear in mind that the MSC has a framework, and underpinned by the FAO framework, which defines how long the standard can take to implement changes as a minimum to allow supply base to come in line with it. That's obviously part of the GSSI benchmarking tool, so you have to be compliant with that. So if you're not GSSI benchmarking, found to be compliant, that's a bad thing. But then, because you're trying to move things in the standard too quickly. So we'll have to be mindful of that. I just come back to, it's about dialogue. Yeah. It's about engaging all stakeholders and talking through the issue and the challenges that exist, so that we can deliver improvement and change in agreed but realistic timescales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so very similar. So from our side, we've been working for more than 20 years to get to a point where more than 90% of the portfolio is certified today. So I think we face the two issues of making sure that our existing suppliers evolve as the standard evolve, and we do believe in evolvement, but also making sure that the suppliers that are not yet certified, that we get them on board. So very similar to what's already been said.
Can I come back?
Of course.
This whole discussion demonstrates one of the critical tensions, which is that while we would all like to see, and particularly from the NGO world, often people think NGOs would really like to stay unhappy forever, but mostly we'd really like to declare victory and go for cocktails. So, you know, we would really like to sit back and say, this has gone really well and we see great improvements. But the challenge is, in order to actually create a bar that is at the right level, we have to be careful of not allowing anything to just sort of slide. And that means maintaining sometimes that hard line. And so while I think dialogue is important, I also think the creative tension between how fast can we get it done in order to meet biological or ecological imperatives versus the tension of, well, it would be easier if we slowed it down, or we have all of these other things we have to take into account. That is a fundamental tension that's going to continue to exist. What I think we have to do is not make it about whether it's an NGO or an industry issue, and recognize that the practical realities are we have an ocean that is still degrading, and we want to address that.
That's quite an interesting idea, that this tension is actually a good thing and a necessary thing, rather than something to worry about and be concerned by. It has to be managed, of course, and the dialogue process is the key to that. As you think about what the success of the MSC so far and its approach, what reflections do you have on how the organisation might think about evolving to improve on what's already something that is a lot of effort's gone into?
Well, I think the MSC to a certain degree is a victim of its own success. The criticism that the organization is facing today, it could have been predicted back in 1997 that this would have occurred. It's only natural that that an organization that seeks to reward the top, say, 20% performers and then bring the rest up to that level over time will at some point, when it gets to around 15%, come under criticism. For the last 15 years, the most celebrated fisheries in the world in the first place have become certified, and now the ones that are more borderline cases are coming through. Some straight above, some maybe slightly below the bar, and maybe even shouldn't have gone through as well. So this is something that could have been expected all the time, but now is also the point where we may be realizing that there is actually a fundamental difference in philosophy in the MSC theory of change and how other NGOs pursue sustainability. And the whole MSC theory is at the very slow macro global level, and it's not something that takes 4 years or 5 years or 10 years. It takes decades, but it's what can, I believe, as an actual believer in the program, it can facilitate true change at a much larger scale. And I think we're just coming to realize that fundamental difference, and it's a way of change that is much harder to sell as well. It's not as populistic as the single case issues that.
So given where the MSC is sitting now, does it get ghettoized in that 20%? Where's its relationship with the other 80%? What does that look like? What does that connection look like? That seems to me to be the fundamental question, the relationship between the MSC and the Fisheries Improvement Project world that you alluded to, Ali. I mean, how do you see that nexus evolving?
I mean, obviously, in the UK, the MSC are intimately involved in that process. I think there is a link there. I don't think the MSC should necessarily drive that going forward. I think that they provide that framework, and that's a recognised framework. I'm not sure if I can add much more to that.
Finally, I've stopped one of them. Yes, please, Amanda.
So I think that there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer to this. What there is a need for clarification and understanding, and potentially a renovation or remodeling, in the sense that at the time the MSC came into play, it set the bar, and it enabled people to understand what the bar was and that there was a process towards moving towards it and create that incentive and process of reward. At this stage, I think that there is sometimes a misunderstanding about what the MSC is trying to do. Is it still setting a bar? And this is where you see some, and I can't speak for every NGO, but I can say that this is where you observe that some NGOs appear unhappy with where the bar is, right? Is the bar meant to be way, way, way up here and still just holding for that top 10 to 15%? Or is it meant to be static or more stable and allow more and more fisheries to become certified? Is the aim to only certify the top of the top? Or is it to enable any fishery to enter a pathway that means it will become acceptable? And unless those differences are clarified, so we can say this is actually what the MSC is doing at this point in time, this is its value proposition in the marketplace. Unless we answer that question, it's very difficult to create a pathway going forward.
Ali?
Yeah, it is a fundamental. Yeah. It is a fundamental, isn't it? And I think we've just got to remember that we're setting this against the context of the SDGs. And if we delivered that, the SDG 14.4, that would be a great place to be, to end IUU and overfishing. However, the MSC and we all need to be adaptive to new information that comes. And I think that the new evidence, the new science should be the fundamentals that drive the change in the standard.
I think as well we have to recognize the MSC can't be all things to all people, which I believe one of the earlier speakers said, and that it also can't be the primary delivery point for the SDGs. So it's defining what that role is and recognizing that, like any institution or business, we have to find the pathway in which we can best deliver and move with that.
What I heard you say, Amanda, there, I think, is that there's a job to do in clarifying the kind of fundamental belief in the purpose of the organisation, and this idea: are we, or is the MSC about defining North and holding that precious? Is that its fundamental belief, that that's its role? Or is its role to say, if we want to effect large-scale change across the globe, perfection is the enemy of the good. Yes, we need to define North, not get too precious about that, and find ways to bring as many people as close as possible to that, recognizing that it's going to be a messy process.
Yes.
And it's about clarifying which of those is the key belief and purpose. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and in fact, then if it's both, let's point out where the line is drawn and where different activities achieve different things.
And maybe think about different organisational arrangements for those two things.
And where balance is in that,
Exactly.
arrangement, really, at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it does that, to be honest with you. To be honest, if you take a step back, I think it does that. What's going to, in my view, what's going to affect the biggest change? What's going to make the biggest difference globally? So that should really define that balance. And I think that bringing everyone along is probably 80%, or maybe even 90%, 80%.
Let's ask Rupert and Nicholas to join us and open up for some questions from the audience and from our online guests as well. Plenty to chew on there, gentlemen. And any reflections from the audience also are most welcome. It's actually a little bit difficult to see. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to pose a question to our panel or to Nicholas? Yes, sir. Hello, Peter. I'll recognise some faces as it comes. I'm giving you the microphone, right?
Don't give them the mic.
Okay. Morning, panel. It's Peter Hadji-Pieris. This is a question to Rupert and the MSC organisation. Rupert, yourself, you alluded at the beginning that some of the certifications were withdrawn because of climate change. Yeah. And there's a recognition that in all of us that have been working in sustainability, the journey is a persistent one and we're always becoming more sustainable. don't you think it's about time that the MSC grasps the moment to recalibrate itself and actually correct the claim and make it so that it's responsibly managed fisheries that you certify, not sustainable? That would take away a part of the problem the MSC does, which gets itself inside the bees and hornets nest on the claim. If you look at all the other GSSI claims and all the other certifications, they certify responsibility. So I think that's a really good area for the MSC to focus on.
Peter, thank you for a nice, easy first question. The MSC claim, certified sustainable seafood, it's a really good question. That is the MSC claim. It's gained traction in the marketplace. As Nicholas said, there's nearly 30,000 individual products in a market worth maybe $6 billion. The market wants traceable, certified, sustainable seafood. It's hard to make up an answer to that one concretely on the fly, but it's been raised several times. When I first joined MSC in 2004, there was a question about the claim. Is MSC over-promising and under-delivering? And to some of the comments from the panel about the sort of evolving nature and understanding of sustainability, maybe that question should be reflected upon and revisited. It's clear that people's expectations of what constitutes sustainability has moved beyond ecological sustainability to encompass, obviously, the social dimension, which Nicola has said we're beginning to look at, and other programs are trying to develop a real social standard for at-sea vessels, and obviously the economic dimension. So my last comment on that is, if MSC did change its claim back to the original strapline, best environmental choice, it would be great to know whether the totality of the conservation and NGO community would then get behind the MSC. That'd be an interesting second question.
Any other responses from the panel?
So I don't think that if you went into the Australasian College of Physicians and asked them in totality to agree on a treatment choice, that they would. So I don't think it's about the totality of the NGO world agreeing to it. I think it's about making sure that there is as clear an understanding as possible about the value proposition and about what it delivers. And that's really what the question about sustainable is.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, the lady at the back. Can we get a microphone to you? Yes.
Hi there, everyone. My name's Vivian. It's more of a personal question, but I really related to what Amanda was talking about earlier with kind of striking this balance about kind of how we define what the MSC does. But I was just kind of wondering, I think there are some fisheries in the world that kind of are quite clearly very unsustainable. And I was wondering if someone from the MSC can kind of clarify for me what the justification is for the orange roughy deep sea fishery. Because that's one that I sort of personally feel is quite sort of clearly quite unsustainable. So I just wanted some feedback from an MSC member of staff on that.
I think we need to keep them from quite brief, but Rupert, let me ask you to respond.
I'll keep it brief. That fishery has gone through an independent science evidence-based certification assessment by independent scientists, been through peer review, been through objections. It has met the standard. That fishery is sustainable according to our standard. We could have a longer conversation as to why you don't think it's sustainable, but through that process it has met the MSC bar, and we celebrate it as a sustainable fishery. But happily carry on the conversation on this one at the break.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Jose. Just throw it. I don't think so.
Thank you. So Jose Villalon, Nutraco. I'm curious, Rupert, Nicola, if as you consider leveraging the standards for social impacts, modern day slavery, that are already out there or being delivered, will you be consistent with the multi-stakeholder approach? In other words, will you consider holding that as one of the main criteria, not to erode the original genesis of MSC and its multi-stakeholder platform? And I would be really concerned if there was a movement to adopt or adapt with someone that already exists or is being delivered that wasn't created with the same integrity and inclusiveness that the MSC started with.
So apologies to the panel. Do you want to take that one, Nicola?
Yeah, I take that one because we are actually maybe it was not clear in my speech, but we are actually actively consulting now, and also the way forward will be actually for fisheries to recognize by 2020 existing social standards that are credible, rather than MSC developing its own social criteria as part of its standard. So to become eligible, the likelihood, because we're still in consultation, but one of the solutions we're offering is that to become eligible to MSC, if you are in a high-risk situation, you should be certified to an existing recognized social standard for fisheries. And it's the same for the supply chain. In the meantime, we have a system of self-declaration because we want to understand the situation within those fisheries, and we're also actively consulting now with various stakeholders to define what that self-declaration will be. But it is not really in MSC's expertise. We don't have a strong expertise on social, so actually in the spirit of your question, we'd rather work with experts in social certification, social standard, and we will collaborate with those if they exist by 2020 for fisheries. I mean,
are there any questions for the panel? Ray.
I mean, if you look to the real threats to the ocean from fisheries, they're not coming from the fisheries that are MSC certified or even those that are close. It's the bottom 60%. So is the MSC irrelevant to solving those problems? And so I'm just interested in everyone's view. We're dealing with, 60% of world's fish production is never going to, or certainly not in decades, going to come close to the MSC standard. So do we need some other organization or some way of solving those problems?
Wish I thought of that one.
So a couple of points there. First is, I don't think that it's MSC's job to solve the entire problem. So just on that basis alone, it's absolutely not irrelevant. Secondly, I think that since the inception of the MSC, we've seen the process of setting the standard and assessing against it has enabled dialogue, debate, and testing of various options around management and various ways forward with respect to what constitutes sustainability. And that in itself has moved the entire bar forward globally. And that comes back initially to the initial question about what constitutes success with the theory of change. Paraphrasing, but that's the idea. I do think that, yes, there are a whole series of fisheries that are not going to ever come close to or have a desire to enter what is currently available to them. And the bigger question there is, what else do we need to do in that space to create a situation of improvement? Because the MSC is not here to solve that entire problem, and I would hope that governments and fishery managers and others would see opportunities to continue to work on that.
Sure. Well, you came in front of me there. That organization is called governments. And to a certain degree, the UN, and I think that is they haven't solved the entire problem so far. But I think also to a degree with the way industry has more ownership of sustainability and is now to a certain degree lobbying government to move quicker in sustainable fisheries management. I'm quite optimistic about the long-term future.
Questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
I'm Julio Moron from Opagac, Spain, and it's just a question to Mr. Ali. How comfortable will your consumers be with the social approach that MSC is taking compared with ASC or FSC that they compile and they comprise principles, so some principles. Like what is the perception that you might have from the market?
Specifically under the MSC
What
standard.
the approach that MSC is taking on the social aspects?
I think Nicola has touched on that. My personal view is that's a start point. It's basic. Where I believe is there's a dialogue taking place about the internationalisation of the responsible fishing scheme and how that can achieve global outreach. My personal view is that is the way that the MSC ultimately should deal with this and layer it in to the MSC standard. But it's very early days within that process, and there's still a lot of dialogue to be had in that space. But that's the way directionally I think this should go.
Thank you. Other questions? I'd like to ask Rupert if he has any questions from the panel or any reflections on what he heard from the discussion.
I have a multitude of reflections and many questions, and I'm tempted to ask for the doors to be shut and keep you all in here for an hour. But well, a couple of them. I think one theme is MSC's in a tough place. That's the structure of the organisation. We have a multi-stakeholder model. There are very different expectations of where the program should go, what it should include. Is it a sustainability standard? Should it encompass a more social element? What's its role with the Global South, data poor, developing world, community-based fisheries? We have a vision, and our vision is of healthy, productive oceans and seafood supplies safeguarded for future generations, this and future generations. We do believe, and we have a 20-year track record, that the theory of change is working. We have more fisheries coming in. It does create the incentives to bring more fisheries into improvement programs, and many on a voluntary basis, because we are a voluntary program, ultimately seek MSC certification. Unashamedly, we want to see global fisheries, and it is a project of decades, operating at a sustainable level. Not necessarily MSC certified. It's up to them whether there's the business case and the value proposition to seek third-party recognition, but that's the level of performance we need to see for the SDGs. We're very clear on our strategic plan, the 20% engagement by 2020, 30% aspirational target by 2030. And to get there, we're going to have to work much more effectively with all of you, civil society, business, and governments to create the right enabling framework for these fisheries to move forward. So, yes, there's things to define. What are we going to do with our in transition to MSC program? What are we going to do with the social? The board has instructed us to work with other standards developers who are trying to develop applicable social standards. That's how we want to work, in partnership. But in the meantime, we're having this disclosure for supply chain and fisheries, and we may require third-party audits by 2020. It is a very dynamic, fluid time, and things are changing. But I do have a question for the panel. Sorry, my question for the panel and for the market people, just to put them on alert. Peter's opening question about the claim. What does the market feel about a sustainability claim and then maybe a different claim after 20 years, back to the best environmental choice?
It's a really good question. I think awareness is still going to be the key things, and I think awareness is going up. So I think we first of all need to make sure that consumers are aware that there is a sustainable claim. And then I think that the more simple we keep it, the better. So if there is a change in what it means, that has to be simplified so that consumers can understand it. So we can't keep confusing them. And then I think it's asking a bit too much to ask that the consumer understands the difference between responsible and sustainability today. I don't think they're there yet.
Yeah, I think you make the point very well. Yeah, I'd rather put my effort into the improvement program and actually delivering the desired outcome than spending too much time on the debate on the wording. There are inevitable questions if you're dropping sustainability, if it's not sustainable, is it unsustainable? And do we need to get into that debate? At the end of the day, shouldn't we just concentrate on delivering the vision?
Agree with that.
I've got a question from sorry, I'm trying to juggle two things here. We've got a question from our online audience here that relates to, again, to this role of MSC in the developing world. My tablet has decided not to be responsive, but it's from Chris Carsten in South Africa asking, what do do the panel feel about the role of the MSC? It relates a little bit to Ray's question, for the developing world in particular, and small-scale fisheries in the developing world. Do you see a role at all in that domain?
Well, small-scale fisheries in general, the MSC value proposition can be lower, even in my country, but also due to the fact that often in the developing world the products go to local markets, and it will be very hard to leverage the same level of consumer demand for MSC certified products. But the improvement projects, and if you focus more on the standard as a tool rather than that as a market as a management tool rather than as a market recognition tool, I think that that could be the way to go. But this may be one of the areas where MSC is at best part of the solution and maybe not the best solution.
Okay. Any more questions from the audience? One more, I think we've got time for one more. Yes, the lady there.
Hi. Just building on a couple of points that people have made, do you think there's a way that the MSC can be more transparent, and in terms of the actual standard itself, it's quite complex and quite rightly so, but is there a way that best practice scenarios can be made kind of more publicly available and transparent to allow that to be used as an empowerment tool, so more people can access the standard, understand it, and then use it, not necessarily to be certified or as a market tool, but to improve these fisheries we talked about that aren't necessarily going to engage fully with the programme? I hope that makes sense.
Responses?
Is that directed at me, I guess? Okay, everyone, yeah, I'll go last.
Maybe I just like to clarify that we are actually starting to do this as part of a new strategic plan, and it's one of the slides I presented. We have those projects where we are, looking at multi-fishery pre-assessment project, and I think by transparency you probably mean more simplicity, because and it is a major challenge, and you're right to point out, and that's something we still need to get better at, making our program much more understandable and simpler to explain to publics. But we invest. We have my colleague Yemi Olorunturi is probably here. She's leading our developing world engagement, and so we have a vast program of capacity building. So there are fisheries improvement providers all around the world we're working with, and we spend time with them, their constituent, the fisheries they're working with, to explain what the standard is. But it takes usually several days of workshops to do that. It is complex. It is a complex issue, and for us, what's complex is how you make something complex much more simpler. We can still improve on that, but it's difficult.
Thank you. We're at 1:30. I know people have other commitments, and I think we need to honour those and your time. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you in particular to our panel for stepping up and offering their reflections. I hope you found the discussion stimulating. I hope we managed to achieve the balance that we talked about and aspired to. Rupert and Nicholas have said they're happy to stay and answer any other questions that people might have of a more detailed nature. Thank you to our online audience as well, and we hope that you've had a stimulating and valuable couple of hours. Thank you.